The U.S.-Israeli genocidal war continues to claim lives. Meanwhile, Israel is unraveling on a variety of fronts. One of those fronts is the food industry. Israel is coming up short, especially when it comes to food items. Well, the Israeli Food Association has even described it as a crisis. Is it a crisis? And is it limited to just food? Hi, I'm Kaveh Tafwai. Welcome to another edition of Economic Divide. Some of the highlights of this program: the food crisis. Food shortages are imminent. Factories are in war zones. One of the reasons. And also, there's been a threat to supply chains. We'll tell you what type of threats. Then, look at the Israeli war costs, up to $269 million daily. $20 billion for the first quarter of 2024 is what's been predicted. And the total war cost still standing at about $50 billion. We're going to take a look at how this U.S.-Israel genocidal war is impacting the cash flow in Israel. And then another aspect not paid too much attention to, which should be actually, and that is the U.S. assistance to Israel, $3.8 billion in military support. You have the $14 billion funding bill that has been passed but has not been dispersed yet, and also the lines of credit by the U.S. How important is that for a lifeline for Israel? As Israel's genocidal war on the Gaza Strip continues, the regime has grappled with various crises, including food insecurity. The Food Industries Association of the Israeli regime has raised concerns about the possibility of a food crisis if the aggression continues. According to reports, officials of the association have requested an emergency meeting to discuss aspects of food security and the establishment of an emergency food stockpile. Israel is also facing a threat to the supply chains through Ansarullah operations against merchant vessels bound to the occupied territories through the Red Sea. The vulnerability of these supply chains raises additional concerns about the stability of the food distribution network. The growing cost of Israel's genocidal war on the Gaza Strip has also raised concerns among regime officials. The onslaught on Gaza is imposing a staggering daily cost of $220 to $269 million in Israel, totaling nearly $18 billion thus far. According to some reports, if the war persists for an additional 5 to 10 months, the potential cost to Israel could soar to $50 billion, equivalent to 10% of the regime's GDP. Time to find out what's been posted online on this. We're going to begin with a website that said shoppers empty supermarket shelves despite pleas not to let the war cause panic. Now, this happened during the beginning stages of the U.S.-Israeli genocidal war. It said aisles display a marked lack of mineral water, for example, canned goods, potatoes, rice, pasta, flour, diapers, after official advice to stock up. The Ministry of Military Affairs, however, has said there were no shortages that would be expected. Of course, that is not how it transpired. Next, another website, Israeli Food Industry Group, warns of potential shortage due to the Red Sea attacks by the Yemeni army. Quote, there is a risk of food shortage in emergencies after threats in the Red Sea. Amid the current developments in the Gaza war, we call it the onslaught. Next, another website, Supply Chain Edge, Israel-Gaza war, risks for electronics and healthcare. S&P Global Analysis is what this entry was drawn in terms of its resources, and it said Israel's largest export lines included electronics, healthcare, and defense supply chains, which could face operational or logistics disruptions in the event of escalated conflict. And finally, what to know about the U.S. aid to Israel. 75 years of support is the duration of time, and the U.S. has contributed around $130 billion to Israel since its founding. That figure is obviously not accurate in terms of other sources to have cited larger U.S. assistance when it comes to Israel. Nevertheless, this particular entry cited that figure. Time now to introduce our guest for our first Q&A. Joining us is Dave Warren. Dave Warren is a political activist. Dave Warren, welcome to the program. Taking a look at the way that this onslaught is costing Israel, we're looking at anywhere between $220 to up to $269 million per day And of course, that does impact the GDP of Israel and the economy overall in more ways than one. The way that there's a budget shortfall and a deficit as a result of that is quite a shock for the economy. How do you think Israel is going to fare when it comes to continuing with these costs? Because this is going to continue for quite some time, it appears. Do you think that Israel can actually withstand this war, or onslaught, I must say?
Well, when you break it down into sheer statistics like that, it seems like it's going to be an incredible feat for Israel to stay on their feet economically. And it's a tragedy when the figures of war are translated into losses of Palestinians and is reduced down to economic numbers in the first place. There's a much greater moral gravity to this problem that needs to be considered. But to the extent that Israel can hold out, it remains to be seen. With this kind of cost per day, $220 million to continue this ground siege. And what I think is critical is for the United States, who is already in the transgressive state by being a accomplice to this genocide, if they continue to support Israel, then that's going to be the only way that they can economically see through this ground campaign of genocide.
All right, let me introduce our next guest. Is Stanley Ezral, who joins us. He is an organizer and researcher at the La Roche movement. Stanley Ezral, welcome to Economic Divide. I'm going to continue with the same train of thought when it comes to the costs of this war, or onslaught, I must say, for Israel. The figures vary, but if we're looking at $250 or $260 million per day, the Israeli economy obviously has taken an impact, and it's now a question of for how long can this go on? And that is something that is not being relayed by officials in charge. The ultimate question here is, do you think that Israel can withstand the costs that are incurring because of this U.S.-Israeli genocidal war?
I don't. Who told you they could withstand it? If they can't do that. And if you look at what Netanyahu and his so-called war cabinet have to say, how they are managing things, they somehow believe that if they keep at it, they can compel the United States and the other nations associated with NATO and so on to bail them out. And at a certain point, that's just, not going to stop. It's not, what they are doing is, as I said before, totally wiped out Gaza. The way that they're, taking care of Gaza is they're killing everybody and shoveling dirt over their graves where they've destroyed their homes, their hospitals, and so on.
It's time now for the Infonews section of the program. Again, a reminder, we have picked the stories or news that's related to the U.S.-Israel genocidal war that have an economic impact, whether it's on Israel, the occupied West Bank, or on Gaza itself. First up, the sector in Israel which is the most important, and again, there's an update to it because the fourth quarter results have been in. Amid the war, which we call an onslaught with Hamas, Israeli startup funding has dropped to a 6-year low. Investments in tech startups have slumped based on the last quarter, as I mentioned, of 2023, 46%, that's almost half, as foreign funds are shying away from reinvestment in local markets. The big question is, how long will they shy away from the tech industry in Israel? Next, Israel's economy as a whole. This entry caught our attention, economic impact of the Gaza onslaught, which they call war on Israel. The economy is facing a strain because the GDP has dropped. No surprise there. Now, this is the part that's interesting. Returning reservists to help the economy as the war looks set to last well into the new year. Think about that. They are withdrawing the reservists from their duty, the genocide that's taking place in the Gaza Strip, so they can participate in one form or another to Israel's economy. That's how bad the economy is doing. They have to pull the reservists off the battlefield. Think about that. Next up, another item that caught our attention, and this has to deal with Israeli withdrawals, where the units, again, as we just mentioned, which are being withdrawn from Gaza, is to mitigate the damage to Israel's economy from the war, which began on October 7th with well, they call it attacks. We call it the liberation that came from the Al-Aqsa flood operation. So two of these entries that are related to this returning reservists shows how badly, again, the Israeli economy is doing. And finally, the movement that's called Boycott of Israel is definitely having an impact. Many are wondering whether it does have an impact or not. But when you have McDonald's CEO coming out and saying misinformation, as he calls it, about its stance on the Israel-Gaza war, we call onslaught, is hitting sales. So he's admitting to the fact that sales are taking a dive. He said several markets in the Middle East and some outside the region are experiencing a meaningful business impact because of the onslaught. That does it for the clips or news items that we picked for you. Again, your suggestions always matter. Contact information is coming up. Time now for the in-depth section of the program. We are looking at the food industry in Israel in terms of the crisis that it is experiencing. At least that's what the Food Industry Association is saying. Instances of supermarket shelves being empty is one example. But is there really a crisis? And how deep is this crisis? Let's try to find out if we can answer you with those questions. First, the location of the Israeli food production facilities. In terms of the impact, 90% of them have been impacted. The reason, it's actually very logical, because they're located in conflict zones. In terms of the geography, they're in the northern and southern regions of occupied Palestine. So that obviously is a logical reason for them to be experiencing disruptions. Next up, let's take a look at the way that the impact fares out percentage-wise. Well, 90% of Israeli farmers have been affected by this. The impact on Israeli farmers is quite severe. When you take a look at the percentage of 90%, then the production overall has decreased 35%. And the ones that are on that fake border with Gaza, 70% of them have been affected and their production to have dropped. So again, these are severe numbers. Obviously, that points to the crisis mode that the food industry in Israel is. Taking a look at the next graph that we have for you in terms of the way that the restrictions are in occupied Palestine. Well, these are some instances. For example, you're looking at 100 to 300 meters. This is only accessible on foot and also for the farmers. But when you have this onslaught going on, it's pretty dangerous. And then you have, for example, 0 to 100 meters of this no-go and high-risk area. Well, these are all, again, restrictions which for the farmers is hard for them to continue to generate the revenues that they have to from this. So this just gives you a snapshot in terms of the types of challenges that they face, used to face also, by the way, because the fighters from the Gaza Strip used to fire rockets into these particular areas. Then we're going to take a look at the food products themselves. Well, 75% is what has been recommended in terms of the Food Industry Association, again, as one of the sources, for the food products to be locally sourced. And if that is done, then it would mitigate the food crisis impact. So that would definitely, I guess, soften the crisis in terms of its impact and basically serve as a cushion if the food products were to be locally sourced. And then our final product, our final graph over here is what has been very effective, and that's Yemen's anti-Israeli moves when it comes to the Red Sea area, for example. They are targeting the Israeli-linked vessels. In case you don't know by now, that has been done on a rather large scale. As a result of that, supply chains for Israel overall have been impacted. The port of Eilat, for example, is almost non-functioning at this point. And of course, the food distribution network has been severely impacted when it comes to the way that the Yemeni army has targeted the Israeli-linked vessels, something that's still ongoing. All right, so it's obvious that Israel does have a food crisis on its hands, but there are also other moves that are being made, which I'd like to ask our guests and find out what state that's in. And in regards lands, let me bring back our guest Stanley Ezral, who's an organizer and researcher at La Roche Movement, who rejoins us. Stanley Ezral, welcome back to Economic Divide. We're looking at the Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has ordered for Palestinian lands to be reclaimed, or should I say confiscated. What is going on there? Because I'd like to find out if he's making, confiscations of these lands in order to give it back to settlers, for example, or to pursue it with farmers. I'm trying to get an understanding of this, if you can help us out here.
What's going on in Israel is not that extreme, but they don't really have any way of preventing that kind of thing from coming to pass in the occupied areas of Israel. There are various things that they are doing, like, they talk about their, landholders, the people that they are sending into the Islamic sections of the Israeli ground, Gaza, the West Bank, and so on. And this, Netanyahu administration has been quite open that if they want to take property, that you have people who are Jewish, who are Zionists, who want to go into these areas and take property that others are living in, that is their right. And if you look at the kinds of things that Netanyahu has said publicly, for instance, go back to the September 23rd speech that Netanyahu made in person to the United Nations General Assembly. And it was in the range of about 8 pages, approximately 2 or 3 pages of that were him discussing how it is that every Palestinian has no right, no sense of humanity, nothing else. All they think about doing is killing people. And what he concludes from that is that, well, if they're killing people, we should kill more people, right? That's what's been going on since then.
The aggression on Gaza and the retaliatory attacks by Palestinian fighters against the regime has also impacted various sectors of the Israeli economy, including tourism, the tech industry, and the construction sector, which are highly dependent on Palestinian labor force. There are now reports that Israel is planning to change its labor policy and import foreign workers from countries like Sri Lanka, India, China, and Thailand. The impact of the regime's budget, incorporating reduced tax revenue, has amounted to $19 billion in the fourth quarter of 2023 and is anticipated to rise to $20 billion in the first quarter of 2024. As 20% of the Israeli workforce is either unemployed or drafted, the Israeli economy is expected to see major hits in the upcoming quarter. Moreover, around 300,000 Israelis were drafted as reservists, 139,000 of whom were withdrawn from the workforce. This signifies the second largest reserve draft in the occupation's history, the first being during the Yom Kippur War.
Welcome to the Quick Take segment. I'm Mahdi Abbasian. The U.S.-Israeli genocidal war on the Gaza Strip is costing lives, and it is costing the Israelis a pretty penny, or should I say shekel. As Israel continues its onslaught spending, how about the U.S. assistance? How instrumental is it to Israel's economy? Washington spends $3.3 billion annually in military budgets and an additional $500 million for Israel's missile defense. And more recently, the White House is pushing for $14 billion in aid to Israel for early 2024. From 2016 to 2020, the United States gave Israel $146 billion in military aid, not adjusted for inflation, according to Congressional Research Service data. And some experts estimate the total value of the aid, adjusted for inflation, to be $236 billion. But the U.S. is going beyond its military aid in order to save Israel's economy. This was evident in what the U.S. president signed in Israel before the year was out in 2023. The U.S. extended the terms and privileges of mutual trade free of customs for Israel, including many agricultural products. The U.S. extended this for 1 year until December 31st, 2024. According to the White House, this extension would provide additional time for the U.S. and Israel to replace the 2004 trade agreement and include the exchange of agricultural products between the two sides. A free trade agreement between the United States and Israel was established in 1985. The agreement abolished tariffs on most manufactured goods traded between Washington and Tel Aviv, but did not include Israeli agricultural products in order to protect American farmers. And then there is the U.S. loan guarantee to Israel. This is perhaps the most important means for Israel's economic survival, especially when it comes to continuing the U.S.-Israeli genocidal war to cushion the lack of cash flow. For decades, Washington has provided billions of dollars in loan guarantees to Israel. It was initially extended until fiscal year 2005, and since then, Congress has extended the program 6 times, running through the end of fiscal year 2028. The Israeli Treasury can use these loans if domestic and international unsecured bonds become expensive. That brings us to the end of this Quick Take segment. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to send us your questions and comments. I'm Mahdi Abbasian, and I'll see you next week.
Many economists have issued a bleak picture of Israel's economy. Things are so bad for Israel in terms of its economy that it had to actually call back some of its reserves. Remember, we had that in our Info News section. These are the reserves that were active duty. They wanted them to come back to help with the economy. Well, Israel depends on the U.S. Ultimately to bail it out. That gives U.S. leverage, however, over Israel, unless Netanyahu wants to save himself by continuing this genocidal war. That does it for this edition of the program. Thank you so much for being with us. Hopefully we gave you some insight into Israel's economy in terms of how it's doing. Tell us how we did. Our contact information is behind you. From me, and the entire team here at Economic Divide, it's goodbye until the next program.